In the summer of 1887, beneath the blazing Montana sun, a young cowgirl named Clara Hayes lived alone on a weather-beaten ranch outside the small town of Willow Creek. People in the valley knew her as the woman no man wanted to marry. Clara was independent, stubborn, hardworking, and unwilling to pretend she needed anyone to survive. Her father had died when she was 17, leaving her a struggling ranch, 20 horses, and a handful of cattle. While other women spent their days sewing dresses and preparing for marriage, Clara repaired fences, rode horses across dangerous hills, and worked from sunrise until darkness covered the mountains. Her hands became rough, but her spirit never broke. The townspeople often whispered whenever Clara entered the general store. Some men admired her from a distance, but none wanted a wife who could outride them, outshoot them, and argue without fear. Clara heard every cruel joke, yet she never complained. She simply tightened her saddle, climbed onto her horse, and returned to the ranch where nobody could tell her what kind of woman she should become. One autumn evening, while riding home through a narrow canyon, Clara noticed something unusual beside the trail. Her horse suddenly stopped and refused to move forward. Looking down, she saw a man lying beneath a cedar tree. His clothes were torn, his shoulder was covered in blood, and his breathing was so weak that Clara feared he had already died. She dismounted immediately and approached carefully. The stranger opened his eyes and reached toward a revolver lying nearby. Clara quickly raised both hands and said, "Easy. If I wanted you dead, I wouldn't be standing here." The man lowered his hand. He looked exhausted, but there was something strangely familiar about his face that Clara couldn't understand. Clara discovered that the man's name was Daniel Reed. He claimed to be traveling through Montana when several armed men ambushed him. He had escaped into the wilderness but had lost too much blood. Clara knew leaving him there meant certain death. Despite every warning she had ever received about trusting strangers, she lifted him onto her horse. The journey back to the ranch was difficult. Daniel nearly collapsed twice, and Clara had to steady him while guiding the horse through the darkness. When they finally reached her cabin, she cleaned his wound, gave him water, and placed him near the fireplace. Daniel stared at her with disbelief. He had expected fear, not kindness, from a woman traveling alone. For 3 days, Clara cared for him while a cold storm covered the valley. Daniel slowly regained strength, but he remained strangely secretive. Whenever Clara asked about the men who attacked him, his expression changed. He only said they were dangerous and that his arrival in Willow Creek could bring trouble to anyone who helped him. Clara refused to be frightened. She had spent her entire life fighting storms, droughts, debt, and loneliness. A few criminals were not going to scare her away from helping an injured man. During those quiet days, Daniel began telling her stories about his childhood, his travels, and the family he had lost years earlier. As they talked, Clara realized Daniel wasn't the arrogant stranger she had imagined. He listened when she spoke and never laughed at her ambitions. He admired the way she managed her ranch alone. For the first time in years, Clara found herself talking freely with someone who didn't see her strength as a problem. But trouble arrived before either of them could understand what was happening between them. One morning, Clara spotted 3 riders approaching from the ridge. Daniel immediately stood and reached for his gun. "Those are the men," he whispered. Clara looked toward the distant riders and realized they had finally found him. The attackers rode into the valley expecting an easy victory. Instead, Clara had already prepared. She moved Daniel into the barn and climbed onto the roof of her ranch house with her rifle. When the first gunshot echoed across the valley, every horse in the corral panicked. Clara fired back, forcing the riders to take cover. Daniel couldn't believe the woman who had saved his life was now defending her ranch against armed men. Together they fought until the attackers realized they were outnumbered by Clara's courage. 2 escaped toward the mountains, while the third was captured after falling from his horse. Daniel finally revealed the truth about why they had been hunting him. He wasn't simply a traveler. Daniel had been investigating a land scheme involving several powerful men who planned to steal hundreds of acres from struggling ranch families throughout the valley. He had discovered documents proving that the land deeds were being forged. The men who attacked him wanted those documents destroyed before he could reach the authorities. Clara immediately understood why so many families had suddenly received threats. Her own ranch had nearly been taken from her twice because of suspicious claims. Daniel's discovery could save the entire valley. Together, they rode to the county courthouse carrying the evidence hidden inside Daniel's coat. The journey was dangerous, but word spread quickly. Ranchers from across Willow Creek gathered behind them. Families who had once been too frightened to speak finally came forward with their own evidence. By the time Daniel reached the courthouse, dozens of people were waiting outside. The powerful landowners suddenly realized their secret could no longer remain hidden. The investigation that followed changed Willow Creek forever. The forged deeds were exposed, corrupt officials were arrested, and hundreds of families kept the land they had worked for generations to build. Daniel became known as the man who uncovered the conspiracy, but he always insisted Clara was the real hero because she had saved him when nobody else would. Weeks later, Clara returned to her ranch expecting life to become ordinary again. But something had changed. She no longer felt like the lonely woman everyone pitied. The valley now respected her strength, and Daniel visited often. Their friendship slowly became something deeper, though neither rushed to name it. One evening, Daniel arrived carrying a small wooden box. Clara smiled and asked what was inside. He opened it and revealed a simple silver ring. "I know everyone once said no man would marry you," he said quietly, "but I never understood why anyone would want you to become less than the woman you are." Clara looked at the ring and then at Daniel. She remembered every lonely evening, every cruel whisper, and every time people told her she was too independent to be loved. She finally smiled. "If you're asking me to give up my ranch, the answer is no." Daniel laughed and replied, "I came here hoping you'd never give it up." They married the following spring beneath the cottonwood trees beside Clara's ranch. There was no grand church ceremony, only family, friends, and nearly every rancher in the valley. Clara wore a simple blue dress, while Daniel stood proudly beside her. For the first time, the woman nobody thought would ever marry looked completely at peace. Years later, people still told the story of Clara Hayes whenever young ranchers gathered around the fire. They remembered the cowgirl who saved a wounded stranger, exposed a conspiracy, and helped protect an entire valley. But Clara remembered the lesson differently. She believed courage wasn't about never being afraid. It was about doing what was right even when fear told you to walk away. And Daniel always said his greatest fortune wasn't the land, the money, or the secret that changed Willow Creek. His greatest fortune was bleeding beside a lonely trail on one autumn evening and being found by the one woman brave enough to save him. What began as a rescue became a partnership, and their story became a legend of the American frontier.